everybody to, I'd like to welcome everybody to the March Beyond Black History Month. We have a beautiful topic today about policing and new initiatives in policing and community events and community policing. And our panel is going to be Bill Woodson. And Bill is an academic administrator and management consultant. From 2019 to 2022, he served as a member of the President's Cabinet at New College of Florida, where he created the college's Office of Outreach and Inclusive Excellence, and was the college's first Chief Diversity Officer. Bill recently accepted a role as Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Hobart and William Smith Colleges in Geneva, New York. We also have Chief Rex Crochet, but he's not here today. But he was the appointed Chief of Police for the Sarasota Police Department in April of 2022. He leads a department of 190 sworn law enforcement officers and 61 civilian support personnel. Chief Crochet promotes community policing initiatives and works in partnership with the community to build trust, transparency, and lasting relationships. Also on the panel is Trevor Harvey, and he's a native of Sarasota and reared in Newtown community. He received his Bachelor of Arts degree in Business Management and Administration from Eckerd College. He is a member of the Light of the World International Church, where he serves as executive assistant and to the senior pastor, and a proud member of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. He is also an ordained deacon. Trevor currently serves as president of the Sarasota County branch of the NAACP, a title he has held since 2002. He does all this while maintaining a career and is currently employed with State College of Florida as coordinator, student services. And lastly, we have Captain Ken Rainey, who spent also his formative years in Sarasota. Captain Rainey served as in the United States Marine Corps from 1998 to 2005. Captain Rainey's current assignment is a commander of the Professional Standards Division. Captain Rainey's responsibilities include the management of departmental training, recruitment, accreditation, and the Internal Affairs Unit. Bill is going to start the panel, and it's going to be on discuss the history, current status, interim impact, and the plan going forward for evaluating the reputation of law enforcement in Sarasota's Black community while enhancing community and public safety and reducing crime. Bill, I think at this time, I guess you can take over.
Thank you. Thanks for that introduction, Gene, and thank you for the invitation to present some of the work that we've been doing with the Sarasota Police Department and the NAACP. I am going to introduce myself in terms of my part of the presentation and a little bit of why I became so enamored of and invested in the relationship between law enforcement and the Black community in a bit. But I wanted to first ask for Captain Ken Rainey to open this discussion up by introducing himself in more detail, and also a bit his perspective on the emergence of the relationship between the NAACP and Sarasota Police Department.
Thank you, Bill. So again, to introduce myself with a little bit more detail, I've been a police officer with the city of Sarasota for 17 years. I have policed in every zone and district within the city of Sarasota. I've served as a patrol officer, a street crimes officer, a training unit officer, training sergeant, going down memory lane now, shift commander, and assistant commander, patrol division, and ultimately appointed to captain 2 years ago and assigned to the professional standards division. So within the professional standards division, we're responsible for the training of the entire organization, the recruitment and background investigations for all of our new hires, the accountability component of a police department, which is incredibly essential with the internal affairs unit. And finally, the accreditation unit, which ensures that the Sarasota Police Department adheres to best practices at the national level. So that's essentially my background and my responsibilities for the police department. And I think that I may be a little remiss to talk about history that I wasn't directly involved in with respect to this relationship. I inherited a division that was ideally positioned through the good work of previous administrations and in partnership with Mr. Trevor Harvey. So if it's okay with you, Bill, I would like to pass it over to Trevor to talk about how that relationship started.
Before you pass on to Trevor, can you say a little bit more about the kind of profile of the Sarasota Police Department in terms of number of officers and some of the things that may be the kind of how you see policing in Sarasota, just briefly, in terms of the kind of priorities and the kinds of things you're doing to keep policing in Sarasota kind of on the leading edge.
Okay, absolutely. So the Sarasota Police Department, we police roughly 58,000 residents, plus or minus some folks. Is obviously a tourist destination and a business hub, so that population gets swelled during the day and then also during season. Right now, we are staffed for 190 officers. We're currently at 186. Last year, we hired, I believe it was a record amount of 30 officers to combat attrition, retirement, and also the city approved increasing our staffing by 10 so we could address issues that the city is experiencing and with greater level of service. One thing that I would like to hit on, and we're still analyzing why, at the national level, many organizations struggle with recruitment. And if you just a quick Google search will show that numerous police organizations across the country are down quite a bit with respect to hiring acceptable candidates. I think in part between our accreditation process, the city of Sarasota specifically, and who it attracts, we do not have the hiring issues that some other organizations have. And I think this year what we'll see soon is a waiting list to become a Sarasota police officer, which is just fantastic. And many local jurisdictions can't say that. So I'm very pleased to be able to say before you that that's the position we're at right now. So how do we achieve that? I think we're gonna have to analyze that a little bit more. But our responsibilities, it's anything and everything that occurs within the city. So we can be reactive to high-profile investigations. In early 2022, we dealt with, for us, a large number of homicides within a short period of time. Also pleased to say that we were successful in solving all of those crimes. They're all closed cases now, which is just fantastic. So it's on one end is homicide investigations, and the other end is quality of life. And that's what we really strive to impart upon our police officers, is that we are a customer service organization and that we do need to provide the highest level of service possible to all of our citizens. So that could look like complaints of noise and where that originates from. That could be complaints of traffic. There's really there's no issue that's too small for us to address for our citizens. And again, it's very important that not every day does somebody call a police officer for service, but when they do, it's so important that that officer responds and they're suited to handle that issue to the best of their ability and with a high degree of customer service.
Thank you. Thank you. And I saw a note, I just want to comment, if people have questions, we will have a Q&A period at the end. And you can put your questions in the chat, and I'm sure we will definitely get to those at the end of the conversation. Before I bring Trevor on to give more context on the community perspective and kind of what excellence looks like and his take on how this partnership came together, I want to take a few minutes just to describe a bit of, I guess, my background. Why am I even, a part of this conversation, since I'm not a leader in the NAACP, nor do I have someone with a law enforcement background. And then also talk about the description of the workshop that Trevor and Ken and Chief Trochet and myself developed, and what that looks like, and why we think that's an important contribution to the quality of service that Sarasota Police Department is able to provide. So I was born in Sarasota, Florida, but I grew up in Washington, D.C., and actually had spent the previous decade prior to coming back to Sarasota in 2019 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And in Minneapolis, kind of strangely and sadly, it's kind of been synonymous with some of the most high-profile, troublesome interactions between law enforcement and particularly communities of color, particularly in the situations where either unarmed citizens or citizens who seem to be relatively compliant to police direction, yet lost their lives in the presence of law enforcement, lost their lives to law enforcement. And I was working on my doctoral dissertation in organizational leadership at the time that so this was happening. We all remember 2014 and Eric Garner and Michael Brown and Tamir Rice are names that most of us remember from the national news stories of people, unarmed people, or in the case of Tamir Rice, armed with a toy gun, who lost their lives in law enforcement. And that really made me want to understand more deeply why this dynamic between law enforcement and the Black community was so fraught and had so many sad stories associated with those interactions. And yet there was not a sense of like, here's how this is going to get resolved. Here's the 12-step plan to reduce these kinds of incidents. And that inspired me to think of how I might be able to use my doctoral research to maybe surface some of the a better understanding and maybe some possible responses that would help impact and reduce the difficulty of that relationship and make it a more effective relationship. I did that work. It ended up having conversations with probably around 100 law enforcement leaders, trainers, new recruits, retirees from around the state of Minnesota. And that became the heart of my dissertation work. But a couple of things emerged from that I thought were principles that could be deployed to improve relations between law enforcement and the community. One of them was the value of creating spaces such as a town hall for interaction between the community and law enforcement leadership to better understand how law enforcement was supposed to work, what law enforcement leaders had as priorities, and for law enforcement leaders to hear from the community what were their concerns, and basically to help the community understand that law enforcement does see themselves as part of the community, does see themselves as accountable to the community, and to have an understanding of how they as citizens could engage and communicate their priorities to respond to concerns or feelings of being mistreated. Another important learning from that for me was the fact that many people in law enforcement, including senior leaders, including some trainers, there's a real wide range of understanding of the historical context of the Black community and law enforcement and how that impacts on the perception of legitimacy and the level of trust that the community might have in 2023. That there's not that you can paint any community with a broad brush. People's experiences are very distinctive and unique, but a lot of people of color are coming up in contexts that make them extremely suspicious of law enforcement, and that suspicion can come out looking like aggression or resistance. And that really is a fundamental dynamic that has led over and over again, we've seen over time, to what should have been routine interactions ending up in tragedy, or even ending up in perhaps physical altercations that leave everyone damaged, psychologically and perhaps physically, and that a better understanding of that social context, that historical context, could be helpful for law enforcement officers as they're going about their day, doing their duties, to understand how to engage with the community in a way that really manifested a respect that set that understand that would frame their behaviors interacting in the community in a way that would set the stage for routine interactions remaining routine. And if things started to go south, maybe even some strategies for helping to get things back on the rails to keep everyone, at the end of the day, if everyone is safe, then everyone is safe and everyone gets to go home. And that's what everybody wants. And so the workshop that we designed really, it speaks to creating that sense of kind of a understanding of the history. Where did law enforcement come from? Some law enforcement officers aren't aware of the fact that law enforcement, as practiced in the United States, as practiced in the South, actually began around the role of what was called the paddy roller or the patroller. Individuals who were deputized with the primary responsibility of controlling the Black enslaved community and catching runaway slaves. And we can go through history and even to for the 30s, 50s, 60s, and 70s and see behaviors where, there was, by law, Jim Crow, and by law or by governor's decree, there was segregation, there was repression, there was violence. And that scar of that history is still borne by people who either lived that history or were raised by people who lived that history, and that impacted people's perceptions in the here and now. And so we talked about a little bit of that, but then we talked about how to set the stage in interaction with in ways that manifest that this particular officer with this particular citizen was going to have a respectful and positive interaction, that was the goal. And that, by signaling that and by not overreacting to signals of suspicion or resistance, we could keep those routine interactions routine. There's a lot of focus on the personal. So I introduced myself, my personal story. We had, either Captain Rainey or Chief Trochet would come in, share a little bit of their personal history. Trevor Harvey comes in and shares his personal history. And we really made this an integral part of a training experience that every Sarasota PD new officer is now going through as a part of this partnership between the NAACP and Sarasota Police Department. And I think we found that the officers both appreciated the time. They didn't find it burdensome. We've gotten pretty high reviews from the officers who've gone through the training. And I do sincerely believe that in moments of in real time, that there can be principles that they've learned in that training that might make them slow down just a little bit, maybe in a situation where there could be a potential for escalation, that hopefully they'll have some additional context around the context of that person in that community that will hopefully keep things routine or get things back onto an even keel. I'm certainly happy to answer any particular questions about what that training looks like. We do some scenario review, we look at some video, we talk about recent histories, we talk about the awareness that the officers have of some of the concerns and of not just the Black community, but also that women have in law enforcement, that people in the LGBT community have had, and some of those experiences, where does that come from? And it's really about reinforcing respect and also helping officers understand that a lot of times behaviors that may seem like aggression or seem like resistance is actually coming from a fear response, and that it's not illegitimate for a perfectly innocent civilian to be fearful in the presence of law enforcement because of the context of that history and what stories they've heard, what videotapes they've seen on YouTube, et cetera. Let me just pause there and ask Trevor to talk a bit, because actually he's the one person who's had the long-standing relationship with Sarasota Police Department and was a key factor in creating this this training opportunity and this relationship, this deeper relationship we have now with Sarasota Police Department. Trevor? Oh, you're muted.
All righty. Good afternoon. How's everybody? So first of all, my name is Trevor Harvey, as was introduced a little earlier by Gene. I am a native of Sarasota. My family goes back almost 100 years here in Sarasota. My grandfather was born in Sarasota in 1924. So you can kind of put the calculations together on how long my family has been here. So I was born and raised. So I've seen the good, the bad, the ugly, and the indifference here as far as Sarasota is concerned. So the question for me really is how we got to where we are with the police training program. So even prior to my roles as the NAACP president, I was always involved in the community and had somewhat of a relationship within with the Sarasota Police Department, as well as the County Sheriff Department as well. As I began to rise up in the ranks within the NAACP, at some point, those conversations, I began to start developing those conversations with previous administrations about how can we really engage in a positive relationship with our local law enforcement agencies. And that conversation ended up turning into talking about various opportunities we could have with creating and coming in and being a part of the training program that all of the officers, all of the new candidates, or cadets as they call them, has to go through when they are hired and they're going through the academy. So we've had a long years of conversations, with local law enforcement about the training program, but we never really could get it off, the ground. Really don't know why we really couldn't get it off the ground. There over the years there have been some changes within, the administration. So we kind of put a pause on that. When Chief Terche was appointed the interim director, the interim chief, he began to have conversations with all of the community, stakeholders. And he immediately reached out to me because Chief Terche and I had a relationship already, even before being chief, because he's been with the department, for a long time. So we already had a working relationship, with each other. So our conversations begin to turn towards what can we really immediately do to kind of move in police relations forward within Sarasota in light of all of the things that we saw and issues that we saw across our country as it relates to policing. So I began to talk to him about the one goal that I had was really getting our training program off the ground with our local law enforcement agencies to give us an opportunity to come in and speak to the officers that are going to serve this community. They should know what our thought processes are, what we think community policing is, what we think relationships between law enforcement and community, should be. And Chief, quite frankly says, Trevor, I'm gonna be honest with you. It's time out for the talking. We need to go ahead and get moving. Let's figure out how we can get this thing, written, how we can get it implemented, and let's get it started. He was very actionable. I want to be actionable. Let's just make it happen. Let's stop talking. We've talked long enough. Let's get moving. And that's the one thing that I can say. And this is not throwing any of the previous chiefs under the bus. But this is one thing that I can say about Chief Terche when we begin to have those conversations about the training program is let's just make it happen. We know it needs to happen, so let's just make it happen and move forward, with it. So after some discussions, and I began at this maybe a little prior to Chief becoming on, because I'm going back to probably around 2020, maybe a little bit just before Chief became the interim, Bill and I connected together on some things. Number one, because both of us was in higher ed, so we kind of connected that way. And then we begin to connect on a couple of other issues within the community. And as I begin to learn more about Bill and Bill's background, I was like, you're it, dude. You're what we've been looking for all of these years. This is why the program hadn't gotten off the ground, because we hadn't had the right facilitator, for what it is that we wanted to accomplish. So as Bill and I was forging, our relationship, we began to start articulating and having myself and Ken and Chief and Bill, we would meet at Metro, Diana, or wherever we would meet at, and just begin to kind of start hashing out what this program was going to look like. And once we got it written out thoroughly, we knew that it was going to be some bumps along the road, but once we got it kind of to a point that we can roll it out, we rolled our first class out in January of 2022. So it's been a little bit over a year now that our program was implemented. It's a very, very successful program. I think the cadets really enjoy having Bill and others, come in talking about what this whole community, policing looks like and what kind of relationship that should occur between community and our local law enforcement. So that's how it all came about. It's been a dream, and it was a dream that came true. We just was, persistent, in making it happen, because one of the things that I used to always share with Chief Terche and even the other previous administrations is Sarasota is not immune to all of the stuff that we see happening in all of these other communities across our country. We're just one incident, away, for some of these kinds of issues happening within our community. As a matter of fact, right after the George Floyd situation, there was a situation that happened, in Sarasota, one of our community public, housing developments that had to be, addressed. And I think we were able to really come together because of that relationship, figure out what occurred, what happened, and how can we make sure that those kinds of situations don't happen again in Sarasota. And all of that happens because of the relationship and the collaboration that the NAACP has, with our local law enforcement community. So that's a little bit of historical perspective on how the training program came about. And we're excited, and we're looking forward to where we're going to go at, in the future with this program. I'll flip it back over to Bill.
Thank you. Thanks, Trevor. I'd have some closing comments to make, but I wanted to first come back to Captain Rainey to talk a little bit about, I guess, from your perspective, kind of what's next, what are the priorities going forward for the department, and then I'll have some closing comments.
Okay, so what's next is to continue to build upon this training. And also, what I'm very excited about is our recent acceptance that was facilitated through the NAACP's endorsement of our organization into Georgetown Law's Active Bystandership for Law Enforcement training program, which all of our officers will receive. So this training is centered upon the notion that not only is it's been in law and in policy for quite some time that intervention will occur when an officer witnesses wrongdoing. However, you can look at several national incidents and you can understand that police organizations, because they're so inherently hierarchical, that there's some roadblocks to intervention occurring when it absolutely needs to occur, whether that's rank, whether that's seniority, tenure, all of those things influencing a younger officer potentially from stopping a more senior officer from doing something that they should not participate in. So what this training is going to be is it is going to put the exclamation point within our organization that you will intervene. And this isn't just about excessive force. It's any type of misconduct that you're stopping it at its very nascent stages prior to it even occurring. So I'm incredibly excited about that. Thank you sincerely, gentlemen, for the endorsement. It's so incredibly appreciated. Just another example of a collaborative approach to bringing a next level style of policing to the city of Sarasota. So that's, for those of you that are interested in Googling it, it's Georgetown University's active bystandership for law enforcement, otherwise known as ABLE. And it's all about creating a culture within a police organization in which officers feel empowered to stop, whether that's the chief of police committing some type of act that needs to be stopped, all the way to the most junior officer. It's breaking the perception of that hierarchy where a senior officer would not be stopped otherwise. So I'm very excited about this training program. We have our Train the Trainer upcoming for that, and our entire agency will be trained in with that protocol this year. So incredibly exciting training that required, for acceptance of that program, a required community endorsement. And again, thank you, gentlemen, for that.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's been a great partnership. How much time do we have, Gene? Are we going till 4:45 or till 5?
We're going to 4:50.
Okay.
Break
Okay. So I
for
have
question and answers.
great. So I have 3 minutes of closing comments, and then I'll turn over to Q&A. But I just wanted to say that it has really been a partnership, and I think one of the things that makes the workshop that we do so effective and powerful. I mean, we do talk about some numbers and statistics. You know, how many people die in law enforcement custody every year, but we also, talk about personal stories. I share stories like the one of my adult son who was wearing his Burger King uniform and driving home to a gated community and pulling into his garage and then being followed by a police officer who thought he was a credible suspect for a recent bank robbery. It's like, these are things that most, that people of color aren't surprised to hear about, but that, would be pretty unusual for a white businessman to be, suspected of being a suspect. And this kind of the kinds of stories that we as African Americans share, and sharing that from folks like Trevor Harvey, like myself, Judge Charles Williams has also been a guest in these. And really, a lot of it is about humanizing and personalizing and helping officers to understand that that even though they're getting some resistance from that seems to come from one community versus others, that there's also that resistance may come from lived experience or from concerns from what we hear from social media. And they also hear from me how pleased and excited I am about what good policing can and has done, and by the fact that I'm very pleased and proud of the Sarasota Police Department, because I do think that of the departments that I've interacted with, a number of different departments because of my research, but I really see that this is a department that is progressive and that's committed, that has built a good track record in terms of the level of service, and that I'm looking for these recruits to continue to build on that good reputation, and so that they have a sense that just because they see a brown face, it doesn't mean resistance or fear. It can mean all kinds of different things, but in any case, they're part of a larger context, and that they have a reputation to build and to maintain. And also the fact that law enforcement writ large, that reputation has been challenged, and so they need to be consciously differentiating the service that they provide in that moment from that larger, media-driven context of what is policing about. And I've also really worked, and the work that we've done with the department has not been just limited to this training. We're talking about, how do we, enhance transparency? How do we, are there implications in terms of how you position recruiting, and how important is it for the officers that you're recruiting to be able to live in Sarasota, or to recruit from the community versus from outside? We've talked about how to make the department's responsiveness to community needs? How do we prioritize the department's actions as a part of helping the community see that this is a service that is supportive of you, and not something that's being imposed on you? I think the response we had to the loud car stereo noise is a classic example of how we're really trying to capture the community voice, because that helps to shape policing priorities, but then also to be transparent about that responsiveness so that people are understanding, oh, police are handling this situation this way because as a community, we've spoken into this and this is how we want it to be handled. So I just want to again commend the Sarasota PD and Ken Rainey and Rex Trochet for being open to this partnership. And I want to commend Trevor Harvey for having established the relationship that allowed us to come in and be a collaborative, partnership to help Sarasota getting the leading edge quality policing that the community deserves. It's going to be of impact, not just to Newtown, but to the entire Sarasota community. Thank you again for inviting us to come and share with you. Jean, do you want to facilitate the questions? You want me to just go ahead and look through the chat and start to respond to some of those questions?
I think we can do both. And I think I'll start with a question for all of you. Most police departments are good organizations. It's just that the outliers, and I like to think they're outliers, get a lot of publicity, and it tarnishes the reputation of the police department in general. What are you doing to hire good police officers who want to be police officers and not the person who wants to be a police officer?
All right, I'll take that one, Gene. So we have currently 2 background investigators. Both are former police officers themselves. So a part of this is there's minimum qualifications, and to that end, criminal history is one that's included. A felony conviction is a bar to entry. A misdemeanor involving some type of dishonest act, such as perjury, is a barrier to entry. There's a medical and psychological evaluation. The psychological evaluation is actually on the state level. It's an optional evaluation, which I find incredible, because I think that the community that we serve needs to have a very well adapted individual serving as a police officer. And again, that background investigation, so we look at everything, through that person's really their life. In some cases they may be young, 22, so we may be going back into their high school years. Social media is something that's looked at. And ultimately, when we bring them in the door, there is interviews, obviously, with our background investigators. There's a panel they sit before of independent people that further vet them, and ultimately to the chief of police. And that's only the beginning. Then they become a probationary employee. So if they have not completed the academy, they go off to the academy, still beholden to our standards. After the academy, which is about 5 months, they come to what we call an agency-specific training, which the training we're talking about today is just one course within many in that agency-specific training. And that's 10.5 weeks. And then after they successfully negotiate that, they enter the field training and evaluation program. And that's another 3.5 months. So they go through 5 plus 2.5, plus another 3.5, ultimately to finally sit in a patrol car by themselves to make decisions by themselves. And then they have another 8 months of probation where we're still, monitoring them like a hawk, because we understand that it's so important to have the right people in these positions. So, and my office does come into play from time to time with internal affairs in these matters when we see anything from courtesy to potential honesty issues. And we use that probationary period to further vet people. And if they're not appropriate for our organization, we'll take appropriate action.
Just to tag on to that, one of the things that surfaced in my research is that around the country, with very, very few exceptions, and Sarasota is not one of the exceptions, African Americans are underrepresented in law enforcement. And there's a multitude of reasons for that. And there is some evidence that while having more racially representative officers doesn't solve the challenges of law enforcement in the community, that it's an important component. Obviously, if you have an all-white police force that's servicing a racially diverse community, that sends an adverse signal that nobody is looking for that signal. Also, the things have changed where it used to be that a marijuana conviction was disqualifying, across the board unilaterally in most departments, and that's changing. It used to be that certain things that might have been more of a problem for someone from not necessarily an African American background, but from a low income background, like an old adverse credit score or credit history would have been automatically disqualifying. But then they start to realize we're screening out people that actually would be good officers because of life circumstances. And so I'm seeing departments around the country starting to modify their criteria to be more understanding of the individual story, to make sure they're not losing otherwise qualified candidates. And I know Sarasota Police Department involves those practices as well. I want to stop talking because I know we have other questions we want to get to.
I just want to jump in just for a second on this as well, going back to the recruitment piece of it as well. One of the things that we have always had conversation with our local law enforcement agencies when it comes to recruitment is actually being intentional about finding those that were born and raised within our community to be a part of our law enforcement agencies. Doesn't mean that it solves everything, but I think a lot of times when we see our citizens and residents of the communities that we live in, when they see officers that they know, that they have some kind of relationship with, those types of collaborations and community relationships tend to be a little bit better. I can say that Chief and his staff has been, really intentional with trying to hire, within this local, community. I know out of several of the classes that we've had, quite a few of the individuals have been out of this Sarasota area, born and raised right here in Sarasota. So that helps with that process as well.
I have a question from the chat. It says for 911 calls for mental health emergencies where de-escalation training is insufficient, how are mental health professionals included in the emergency response team?
I'm gonna say something and then I'm gonna pass it on to Kenny because he probably has a little bit more detail. I know, again, one of the goals of this organization, the NAACP, is always trying to close the gap on various needs that we see that needs to happen within local law enforcement. When everybody when the word a few years ago started floating around the country about defund the police, I began to start asking people, do you really know what you mean when you say defund, the police? We don't need to defund the police. What we need to be asking our agencies to do is look at the various resources that they have and see if they can reallocate some of those resources to go towards mental health, to go towards hiring a mental health person that can go out on certain calls with local law enforcement. So those conversations are always ongoing that I know that this organization has with our local law enforcement agencies. And we hope I know that that SPD has been doing a little bit of it. We do know that we have a long way to go, but I think we're heading, in the right direction. So I'll flip it over to Kenny because he probably has a little bit more detailed information on that.
Right. So this is a great question because really the intersection of criminal behavior and mental health is just something that, every law enforcement officer is going to be encountering folks experiencing a mental crisis. That's a fact. To really enable the Sarasota Police Department to be effective in this endeavor, we've invested in crisis intervention training and mental health first aid training. So 2 fronts. And right now, all officers coming in get that training when they come in the door. Prior to them even getting in the police car, they get it in agency specific training. And we invest in that. So as these crisis intervention training, as it comes up, it's a free course at the state. It's just infrequent. It's hard to get seats. We pay an instructor to come in and train all of our folks So right now, if you interact with a police officer from the patrol division in the city of Sarasota, there's a 94% chance that that officer has had crisis intervention training, which I think is fantastic. There's a 100% chance that that officer has had mental health first aid training, which is also fantastic. To have a social worker or a mental health professional there in real time during a moment of crisis, we don't subscribe to that model yet. First Watch of Sarasota has the behavioral health response team, and we do some referrals to that organization, which contacts folks after the fact. And then we also have our homeless outreach team, because folks that are experiencing homelessness oftentimes also have issues with respect to mental illness. And within our homeless outreach team, we do have 2 embedded social workers. So, but that's more along the lines of not an emergent, in progress, dangerous call where law enforcement presence is needed. All of our folks are trained in de-escalation, and to not rush needlessly into whatever the circumstance may be to create the jeopardy that results in tragedy. So I hope, Mr. Weddle, I addressed your question. But yeah, right now, 94% of patrol crisis intervention trained, 100% mental health first aid. And a part of that is understanding all of the resources in the Sarasota community.
Ken, when police officers are assigned to an incident, does the desk sergeant send them there, or does the desk sergeant know a little bit about the incident before he assigns a police officer or officers?
So the city of Sarasota contracts our communications through the county. So the county has a consolidated dispatching center. And so all 911 calls in the Sarasota area go through the Sarasota County Dispatch, and we have dedicated dispatchers at the dispatch center that dispatch those calls out. So emergent calls are dispatched via voice, non-emergent calls are dispatched via computer. And all officers that are working on the street, listening to the radio and in front of a computer in their car are aware of the calls that come out.
In addition to that, if they're being assigned by the computer or by person, is there any indication that a social worker or a mental health counselor would be appropriate to assist or go with the police officer or officers before they're assigned that?
Not at this point, sir. And right now, it's a question of resources within the Sarasota County area. That behavioral health response team, when I was in the patrol division, it was staffed with 4 people. So it almost, based on that level of staffing, it created like a need to refer after the fact. We don't have an embedded unit of mental health professionals to go out to those calls in real time.
I think that goes back to what Trevor was talking about not defunding, but reprioritizing funds to include or assist the police officer or officers when they go out on things that are tough to do. It's a bank robbery or a domestic relations situation. A caseworker may be able to de-escalate or cut out the need for force or restraining, that escalates it also.
Right.
Is there any thought about that in your training or
Well,
discussion?
there's certainly conversation and discussions about it. And the challenge is threading the needle between preserving safety of all and, we're encountering folks that maybe, threatening suicide, and in those circumstances they may be armed, and that may not be the best circumstance for a person without any protective equipment or any other equipment to get anywhere nearby. And to that end, going to somebody threatening suicide in a house, our officers right now is like, okay, is there anybody else in that house that is in imminent danger? And if the answer to that is no, we'll do a period of due diligence and communicate from outside the house. But everybody on the police officer side of that call knows that we're not going to force that equation to create tragedy for that person. So, and that's where a referral will come in after the fact to follow up, obviously, and preserve safety for that person.
Bill, you've left now Sarasota, you're in New York. Who's taking up your weight to do the training or assist the training or take over your responsibilities?
So I've been partnering with Trevor to come into the training room and facilitate the training. I've also partnered with Judge Charles Williams, and I think it's helpful to have a two-person team, both so that people are understanding how we deliver the content. But I'm also pleased to say that so far, Captain Rainey says that he should be able to schedule things far enough in advance so that I can get back and forth to continue to deliver the trainings in person. So that's the going forward hope, is that we continue to have that capacity on part of the department to be able to bring me in, and that my schedule will allow me to come in and continue to do these trainings.
I have another question. Many of us hear the motto, serve and protect, related to police forces. How do we recruit officers with that point of view, protecting and serving?
So this year, I've made it a point to personally sit on the police applicant review board. So I'm essentially the chair on that, and I'm able to gauge in real time applicants that are coming in the door to the police department. And several of our questions are centered around the notion of, what does community policing mean to you? And to really to get these folks to define what they believe prior to them potentially having any training, what they believe the role of a police officer is in contemporary times. And I think it's a very interesting question to ask. And what we see now with this younger generation of prospective officers is that they are bought into the idea of making change, of being positive role models for their community. It really is. It's an heartening thing to see these young folks coming in, really wanting to do the right thing and coming from the right perspective. So, but yeah, to that end, the interview process really does expose a lot of the intentions behind why they want to be a police officer.
This is a question from Commissioner Trice. She said that you set up an excellent briefing for her last week, and might that be a good way to provide a subset of that briefing to community groups?
Yes, ma'am. I think that's a great idea, and I hope you really enjoyed yourself. And I think we could certainly provide that. I know that Chief Trochet is in the very beginning stages of establishing our Citizens Academy, which covers exactly and more from what you received during that training, ma'am. So yes, I am a huge proponent of passing just understanding of the how and why police organizations do business the way they do, but also not being a stonewall and listening to input from other people. I think that'd be a fantastic setting to learn and to grow collaboratively.
Right.
I've been raving about it.
In line to that question as well, one of the things that we've been having a conversation, and we haven't quite gotten there yet, and I think we're going to get there with Kenny and Chief Crochet, is about having a broader community forum, to have that kind of presentation done on a larger group versus in some of these smaller pocket groups that we often tend to have some of those conversations in. So we just got to kind of really figure out, and I'm gonna be as transparent as I can. One of the biggest concerns when you bring some of those kinds of presentations into the community, into a larger forum, you always take the risk of those meetings being hijacked and turned into something that they shouldn't be turned into. So we're just trying to work through that and how we can, minimize some of those kinds of responses that could occur, how we can minimize some of those. But to Gene and to Debbie's point, that is on the table. We're constantly having that conversation with the chief's, administration. And hopefully at some point before this year is over with, we will be able to bring that to a larger scale so they can see, even to the point of, when Deb talked about the presentation that she did, Bill and I a couple of years ago, after a meeting with the chief and Kenny, and I would like the greater community to do this as well, to really understand policing's job, is Bill and I did the simulation, went in the simulation room, and I'm gonna be honest, I killed everybody. And, the split second, the scenarios that they give you, it was something to go through, and gives you a better understanding of what law enforcement, goes through. Now, it doesn't justify excessive, force and inappropriate, behavior, but as a citizen, it gives you a little bit better understanding. So we're hoping that some of those kind of things could even be pushed out on a larger scale to the community so they can kind of understand.
I want to take this time to thank Bill Woodson, Rex Trochet, Trevor Harvey, and Captain Ken Rainey for this presentation today. It was very illustrative of what we're doing in Sarasota County to police it and protect it. Next April is going to be the Black History Month program by Debbie Trice, and it's going to be about the role of Black GIs in World War II, and that's going to be April 16th. See you there. I'd like to
April
say
April 20th.
April 20th.
20th.
Well, we'll say about that, April 20th. The Masala Remembrance Program and EJI is going to recognize our essay contest winners of March 30th at the UU Church on Fruitville in Sarasota. And the Freedom School put on by Asala at the Betty Jean Johnson Library is going well. We have about 30 people registered and about 20 to 25 students show up each Saturday from 12 to 2. And I think, Linda, if you don't have any other announcements, you can probably stop the recording. But stopping the recording just stops the recording. If there's still more questions we want to go through, we can ask the panel to stay on. But we're going to take the time to thank everybody again and say we're going to end our program, and we'll stop the recording, but we're not